Chapter 16, it's out of your control anyways. So why even think about it? What are the things that you will notice when you venture? Right. So it's this idea of taking away from today and investing in something for tomorrow. And it's an arbitrary, you don't know. It's an ambiguous thing that you're actually investing in. You're making this choice that is known and understood. And it's very clear in your mind and everybody else's mind, and investing in something that is much more ambiguous. It's alternative. It's an alternative that you don't know what the outcome actually will turn out to be. You often don't even know what the alternatives actually are. You completely underestimate how many alternatives that they actually are. And those alternatives you have to actually search for and understand. When you venture, you don't really understand your locus of control. It's not as easier as you understand. So what do I mean? It's the things that you can control and that you can affect at your fingertips. One of the things that I study and try to think about is making inferences based on outcomes that exist. Right. So I typically study failure, and the outcomes that are often produced are are not what we often think that they actually are. This goes back to a theorist, um, Charles Perrow, and even much earlier than that in psychology literature that was looking at. Perrow is a sociologist that studied failure. And this type of literature looks at when we have an outcome, when something exists that is negative, we have a tendency to kind of spiral out of control and want to blame everything around us. We think everything is the reason, everything is the actual cause. If you're to look at things where they do reports, for example, uh, of major accidents, they'll have a whole bunch of different reasons that are contributing. Now, what they typically don't suggest, because it's very difficult to know, is how much of each particular factor is actually leading to that particular issue. Or even if you were to read things like companies' annual reports and they talk about the different risks that companies will be exposed to, you don't know what those risks, what those different uncertainties will resolve. What are the different bad things? You know, possible combinations of what they actually are, possibly, not all of them, but there are many that you don't understand the probability that they're going to exist. And every once in a while, and these are the things that often throw us off. And this is what uh, Nassim Taleb talked about and popularized a lot, is the black swan, where there's these things that are just really highly unusual that shift everything, the whole system. And they're really negative, or maybe they're really positive. But we often typically don't worry about the positive things because it's working out in the way that we intended it to be. It's the negative things that we tend to really focus on. But what all of this stuff says is that we don't really understand the underlying reasons why things happen. It's very difficult to know why things happen and why we get a particular results, an outcome. And what we tend to do as human beings is we tend to attribute all of the successful things that have happened to us. We try to think about those things, and then we sort of push away all of the things that are negative. This is the fundamental attribution error. The reason why it's called the fundamental attribution error is that it is so well understood that it is fundamentally part of, it's almost like a rule or a law at this moment because it's so understood that we tend to do this. And it's for good reason. If you were to look at this in nature, If you were to look at any system in nature, you would see that there likely would be the desire to attribute things to the decision maker and everything else that you're not interacting with, that you're not going to want to attribute to you. But there are many things that cause things to happen. The reason why I'm existing and driving, I drive my car. One could have said that I learned how to drive a car. But if you break that down, you begin to realize that the car had to have existed. And who was actually the inventor of the car? And then who gave that inspiration of the car? Um, my parents had a big influence on me actually wanting to drive a car. I grew up in a country that having a car is an automobile is actually a thing. In many countries, it's not a thing. So if you start breaking it down and you start looking at things, you yourself actually don't have a lot of agency in any particular moment in terms of why it actually happens. And most of it is outside of your control. Most of it, almost all of it, even the conception of our world around us and how we understand that, it's already been crafted for you. And so it's outside of your control before you even get to the system and you make that decision. Much of it's already been decided. So I often think about that. And it helps me when I start spiraling out of control in my thoughts when I'm venturing and doing something that is ambiguous and not well understood. And that's a lot of things that we often do in life. A lot of things are very routine that we do. The vast majority of things tend to be somewhat routine, but there's things that we do that are different that we haven't done before. Raising kids, for me, it's been getting, married. I do have this entrepreneurial venture called the Reciprocity Project that I've talked about. But there's other things like having kids, getting married, just getting older and going through older life experiences that one goes through, trying new ice cream, trying new food, any number of these different things that I try to do, particularly when it gets overwhelming and it starts causing me negative emotions. I Despite the fact that I want to internalize the outcomes that are causing the negative emotions. So often it's not what expected. There's a lot of nothingness, right? It's not, you expect when you do something, when you venture, that you get a positive outcome. That's just the expectation that we do. But most of the time, we don't even get a negative outcome. We just get nothing. Nothing happens. And so when that happens, I first of all, I spiral out of control like almost all of us. But then I have to take a step back and I have to think about, okay, what is actually in my control in this circumstance? What is it that I'm actually moving a dial? And when you break it down and you start decomposing things, if you do this as an exercise, it's actually quite interesting. I think it's, I borrow from I think it was Toyota. I think it was the actual founder of Toyota from many years ago, came up with the 5 whys of trying to figure out why something happens. So you ask a series of whys repeatedly until you find the root cause of why something actually happens. It's a really interesting exercise because you begin to understand that there's many different reasons why things happen and many things that are outside of your control that you can never affect and you can never take control of. And even those things that are in your control, one of the things we know, and there's very strong literature on this at this moment, particularly from people like Hazier Ramadad and John Sternman at MIT, that is showing that simple delays that are in any particular system. If you just put any delay in a decision, you add, so for example, you make a decision and you have to wait for a day to get the outcome, or you wait for 6 months or 10 years to get the outcome. We are terrible at making decisions and terrible at making inferences on these decisions and why a particular outcome actually happens. We can't figure it out. But the challenging thing with most of the things that we venture with, and in fact, most things in life that actually matter to us, like having kids and getting an education, all of those particular things, all of those have what's called a time delay or a lag time between when you actually perform the action and do the thing and you get the outcome. They all have maybe 10, 20, even 30 years of delay by the time you actually get that outcome. Think about the simple case of actually investing in mutual funds for your retirement. Is why people don't do it. If you were to invest today, there's very little impact that it has on you. In fact, it's pain. All of it's pain. You're taking away from what you could do today. And by the time that you actually get the outcome, it takes 30 years to get that outcome. And most people, and I ask this to my students in my class, I could say you can become a billionaire, and the recipe is very easy to become a billionaire. You just take 10, 20% of everything that you make, you work for a very long time, and you invest for 90 years. You do this, most people, even on a pretty modest salary, will get to the billionaire status, right? But that means you have to work for many, many, many years. It also means you have to feel the pain for many, 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 many years in our life, probably most of your life. And it's fascinating because almost everybody has the decision or the feeling to naturally say, why would I ever do that? And, the truth is, with these venturing choices of going into something that is ambiguous and you don't understand and it's not clear, the truth is, there's no good answer. There's no real reason of why you actually do something. If you break it down, there's no good reason ever in any of these choices because there's so much uncertainty and ambiguity in terms of what you're actually doing. And there's very little payoff for a very, very, very long time. And many times that payoff doesn't even result. And so why do you do it? There's no good reason. Why do you have kids? People might want to say that you have all of these positive emotional reactions when you have kids around, but there are many parents that have dealt with kids that are not so easy to raise and have part of your life. And many parents that have raised kids and then their kids have disappeared out of their life and it was all just negative experiences. And many of it was negative experiences. So the fact is that you don't quite know, and there's no good reason why you actually do this. So what we actually have here is that most of the things are outside of your control. If you start breaking it down, the outcomes that you actually do may have an impact at some point in the future. And you have this ambiguous, you don't understand what the future is. There's very little benefit to actually pursuing this thing. So all of this has to say, and has to come down to when you pursue these things, is to realize that you do it for things that cannot be explained and do it for reasons and pursue things for joy more than any other thing. right? The reason why you want to invest in the future, for example, in the financial markets and do mutual funds and invest for your retirement, it's only for joy. It's only for learning how to do something and look at how something actually builds. If you do it for things like, I'm going to be ultra wealthy or any of those kind of things, it's very difficult to motivate yourself to do those things. But if you shift it and simply say, like, I don't know what I'm doing, I have very little control over everything that I'm doing, and any particular decision that I have is likely not going to matter that much. It's like voting, for example, in a democratic system. Your choice makes very little decision, very little impact on anything. Doesn't really matter. But you do it for other reasons that we can't explain, that are very difficult to actually explain. Things like joy, or things like because you just want to. And if you look at it that way, instead of rationalizing everything and breaking it down into very simplistic understandings of why things actually happen, you're more likely to enjoy what you're actually doing and more likely to venture and pursue things just for the hell of it. All right. Take care and have a wonderful day.